I always thought raising a child alone would be the hardest part of my life. Turns out, it wasn't the struggle that broke me, it was watching my son slip away after everything I poured into him. I'm 62 now, living in a small brick house just outside Charlotte. The same house where I worked 2 jobs, stretched every dollar, and whispered prayers over that boy's crib. I didn't mind the sacrifice. A mother's love doesn't keep score. But life has a way of teaching you lessons in the quietest, sharpest moments. Mine came the day my son married a woman who looked me in the eyes and told me I wasn't family anymore. I never imagined that all the years of loving him alone could be rewritten by someone who barely knew me. But this is the story of how it happened and how I learned to stand back up. I didn't start out thinking I was going to raise a child alone. Life just has a way of handing you roles you didn't audition for. I was 21 when I found out I was pregnant with my son, and 22 when I realized his father wasn't going to be any part of his life. By the time I turned 30, the idea of depending on anyone had already become something I quietly folded away, like a dress that didn't fit me anymore. We lived in a small, working-class neighborhood just outside Charlotte. Nothing fancy. A row of brick duplexes, cracked sidewalks, and kids riding bikes past the same patch of grass every afternoon. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody, even if nobody was really close. The walls were thin, the rent was high, and the days ran together, but it was home. It was ours. And somehow, even in the struggle, it still felt warm. My son was my whole world back then. He was this bright-eyed little boy with a smile, so wide it felt like sunlight breaking through an overcast sky. I used to come home after long shifts, sometimes 2 back-to-back, and the moment I walked through that door, everything softened. I'd see him running toward me with those tiny legs, calling Mama, like I was the whole universe he'd been waiting for. And even if I could barely feel my feet from standing all day, I'd still scoop him up like he weighed nothing. Some nights, I'd sit on the edge of his bed after he fell asleep and just watch him breathe. I used to whisper, "It's me and you, baby, always me and you." And that wasn't a promise I ever questioned. Not once. Our routine was simple. I'd wake up before the sun, cook him breakfast even if it was just toast and eggs, then walk him to the bus stop before starting my first shift. After work, I'd help him with homework, cook dinner, and listen to him talk about whatever tiny thing had made his day exciting. Kids can find joy in the smallest moments, a drawing, a joke, a sticker from a teacher, and I lived off that joy. It kept me going when everything else felt heavy. He didn't notice how tired I was back then. I tried to hide it. I didn't want him growing up feeling like a burden. He'd sit at the table coloring while I washed dishes, and sometimes he'd look over his shoulder and say, "You're the best mama in the world." And I'd smile like those words didn't break me in half, knowing how hard I was fighting to be exactly that. Through those early years, I held down whatever work I could get. Grocery store cashier, hospital janitor, lunchroom helper at an elementary school. I never had the luxury of finding myself like some folks do. I found survival instead, and that had to be enough. But even in that, there was love. My son never went without food. Never missed a school field trip if I could help it. Never felt like he was less than any other child around him. He used to hold my hand everywhere we went, the grocery store, the bus station, church on Sunday mornings. Sometimes he'd cling a little too tight, and I would laugh and tell him, "Baby, I'm not going nowhere." And he'd say, "Good. I don't want nobody else but you." There's something about memories like that, they soften you and hurt you at the same time. As he got older, he became less talkative, but that's natural. Teenagers start forming their own worlds. I tried not to take it personally when he left for school without saying much, or when he spent more time with friends and with me. Still, I missed our little routines, the slow dinners, the quiet talks, the way he'd sit beside me on the couch and lean his head on my shoulder. I could feel him slipping into his own life, and part of me was proud. That's what you want for your child, independence. But another part of me felt a little ache, like watching a door close slowly and knowing you can't stop it. There were signs he was changing, but they were small at first. Harmless things. He'd come home talking about new friends and new interests, and I'd listen the way I always had. He'd ask if he could stay out later, and I'd try to balance my rules with letting him grow up. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who held her child too tight. Then came the nights when he just seemed distant. Not angry, not cold, just somewhere else in his mind. He'd sit at the table poking at his food or staring at his phone, and I'd ask him how his day was and get a shrug instead of a story. I remember one evening when he was about 17. He had been out with a group of friends I didn't really know. When he walked in the house, he barely looked at me. He went straight to his room, closed the door, and stayed there until dinner. I knocked gently and said, "Food's ready, sweetheart." He came out, but he didn't say much. Didn't smile. Didn't ask me how work was. Just sat there quietly. I kept telling myself it was normal teenage stuff. Everyone talks about that phase like it's a storm you just have to wait out. But inside, I missed him. Not the teenager sitting in front of me. I missed the little boy who used to run into my arms like the whole world disappeared when he saw me. By the time he finished high school, he had his mind set on building a life that didn't include much room for me. Not intentionally, he wasn't unkind, just focused. He worked a job, took some classes at the community college, and spent every spare minute with new people. He'd come home late, leave early, and sometimes go days without saying more than a few words. I remember one morning, I made him his favorite breakfast, cheese grits and scrambled eggs, hoping we could sit and talk the way we used to. When he came downstairs, he grabbed a plate, sat for 3 minutes, and then said, "I gotta go, Ma. I'm meeting someone." And before I could say anything, he was out the door. I stood in the kitchen alone, staring at the empty chair across from mine, hearing the quiet settle into every corner of the house. But I didn't allow myself to feel abandoned. Not then. Not by my own child. I brushed it off as change. Growth. Life moving forward. If I'm being honest, I held on to the idea that no matter how far he drifted, he would always circle back to me. Always. That's how motherhood works in your mind, even when your heart knows better. I invited her to holiday dinners. She declined. I suggested we all go out to eat sometimes. She said she'd check her schedule. I tried calling my son more often, but she always seemed to be around, answering first or giving him excuses about being busy. There was a day I'll never forget. The day I realized she wasn't just distancing him from me. She was shaping the way he saw me. I invited them both to a small cookout I was hosting. Nothing big. Just neighbors, a few family members, some food on the grill. My son said they'd try to come. But when the day arrived, they didn't show up. Hours passed. Evening came. The food got cold. And just when I was cleaning up, he called. He said, "Ma, we ended up hanging out with her family. Sorry, I forgot to call." Her family. The words hit me like cold water. Not his family. Not me. Her family. I knew in that moment something had shifted. Something important. A mother can survive distance. She can survive independence. But being replaced, that's a different kind of pain. Weeks turned into months, and the gap between us widened. I'd call him, and he'd call back hours later. I'd text him, and he'd reply with one-word answers. I'd ask to see him, and he'd say, "We're busy." Not "I'm busy." We. This woman wasn't just walking into his life. She was planting a flag in the middle of it. And even though I didn't realize it then, this was only the beginning. The beginning of a shift that would take my son farther and farther from me. The beginning of a story where love was not enough to hold on to someone who allowed someone else to draw the lines. And the next part of the story is where those lines become deeper, sharper, and impossible to ignore. I should have seen the wedding coming long before he told me. The calls that used to come every evening turned into every other day, then once a week, then whenever he remembered. The visits that used to be effortless felt scheduled, almost supervised. And anytime I asked about their plans for the future, he'd say, "We'll see," in a way that made me feel like I wasn't meant to be part of those plans. Still, When he finally came over one afternoon and told me he was proposing, I hugged him so tight he laughed and said, "Ma, I can't breathe." And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself believe this wedding might bring us closer. I imagined her sitting beside me, flipping through color swatches, asking for advice about flowers or dresses. I imagined feeling included, connected, needed. But life doesn't always unfold the way a mother hopes it will. The wedding planning began, and from the very start, her family took charge. Not just helping, taking charge. Decisions were made before I was even told the ideas existed. Addresses were chosen, dates set, venues booked. I wasn't asked for help choosing decorations or music or anything at all. I tried to tell myself they were just excited, just involved, but deep down I could feel it, that slow disappearing of my place. My son would tell me small details here and there, like crumbs dropped on a path I was never meant to follow. Her mom picked the venue. Her sister's handling the invitations. Her cousin wants to do the photos. Every sentence built a wall I didn't know how to climb. When the invitations finally came back from printing, mine arrived with the regular mail, in a plain envelope, addressed like I was just another guest. I brushed my fingers over my name and tried to ignore the sting. I held that envelope the way someone holds bad news they don't want to open, but I smiled. I told myself not to make everything emotional, not to read too much into details. But details matter. They always do. The day of the wedding rehearsal, I showed up early. I wore a soft lavender dress, the one I'd saved for special occasions. I had done my hair, taken my time with makeup, tried to look like a mother who belonged in the front row. When I arrived, her family was already there, gathered in little circles, whispering, laughing, moving around the venue like they owned it. She waved at me with a quick, tight smile, the kind of smile you give out of obligation, not affection. Her mother gave me a handshake, like we were meeting at a business lunch. Her sister barely looked at me. I stood there trying to steady my heart, reminding myself that weddings bring out nerves. Stress. Maybe that's all it was. But the way they all clustered together, busy, organized, connected, made me feel like I'd stepped into someone else's celebration. Not my son's. Not mine. During rehearsal photos, the photographer called out groups of people to arrange. Bride and her parents. Bride and her sisters. Bride's family. Groom and bridesmaids. But when it came time for my son's side of the family, nobody called my name. I stood off to the side, clutching my purse, watching as they snapped photos I wasn't invited to be in. My son glanced my way once, but he didn't say anything. I kept waiting for him to say, "Come on, Ma," but the words never came. Eventually, I walked over and gently asked the photographer, "Will there be shots with the groom's family too?" She looked at her list and said, "Oh, I only have the bride's family group shots for today." For today. Like, I wasn't even part of the equation. I swallowed the hurt and nodded, pretending it didn't matter. Pretending it didn't already bruise. The actual wedding day was beautiful, breathtaking even. White flowers hung from arches, soft music played in the background, and her family filled every seat, every space, every moment with presence. I sat near the front because someone politely pointed me there, not because anyone had truly made space for me. When she walked down the aisle, my son's eyes lit up like the sun had risen just for her. I couldn't blame him. She looked stunning. And I wanted so badly to feel joy instead of the quiet ache that pressed against my chest. During the ceremony, when the officiant asked the families to stand, only her family stood. Nobody gestured for me. Nobody remembered. I sat frozen for a second, then pushed myself up slowly, alone, while everyone else was already standing in unison. It felt like a spotlight had found me without my permission. At the reception, I watched her family take over every table, every conversation, every moment around my son. They danced with him, toasted him, laughed with him. I tried to join a few conversations, but each time I stepped closer, They shifted slightly to close the space, like water moving away from a stone. Her mother took up the space beside her at the head table, the place I should have been. Her father gave a long speech about their daughter's new beginning and the loving family she comes from. Not one mention of the man who raised the groom alone. Not one sentence acknowledging the years I carried that boy through storms they never even heard about. I waited for my moment to give a toast. I had practiced it the night before, but the microphone never came to me. I sat there holding my folded napkin, my hands trembling slightly, praying no one would see how small I felt. Toward the end of the night, as people began dancing, I finally worked up the courage to ask my son for a photo, just one picture of us, one memory I could hold on to. Before he could answer, his wife stepped in and said, "We're doing couple photos now. Maybe later." Later never came. That night, after the reception ended, I went home and sat on the edge of my bed still dressed in my lavender gown. I stared at the wall for a long time, feeling something inside me shift, unravel, breathe out in a way I didn't expect. I realized I didn't just lose place that night, I lost footing. The days after the wedding became a blur of silence. Fewer calls, shorter conversations, excuses layered on excuses. "We're busy. We've been out. I'll call you later." We're settling in. But we never included me. Whenever I offered to visit, she answered the phone first. Whenever I tried to plan something, she had reasons it wouldn't work. My son became the echo of her choices, her tone, her distance. He wasn't unkind. He was simply gone from the version of himself I once knew. And each time I reached out and felt that quiet wall between us grow taller, I realized what that wedding had really shown me. It wasn't just a marriage ceremony. It was a rearranging of loyalties and a rewriting of where I belonged, in a life I spent decades building. And somewhere deep in that quiet hurt, I felt the next chapter forming, the beginning of a conflict that would eventually push me out completely, into a loneliness I didn't deserve and didn't see coming. I had spent weeks trying to pretend things would eventually settle, that the distance between my son and me was just a phase that would pass once the excitement of marriage faded. I kept telling myself he would call more, he would visit more, he would remember the woman who raised him, who stood beside him when nobody else did. But as the days stretched on, the silence between us grew heavier, like a weight sitting in the middle of my chest. One Saturday afternoon, after waking up to yet another day without hearing from him, I made a decision. I told myself I wasn't going over there to argue or accuse anyone. I wasn't going to beg for attention or make a scene. I just wanted to see my child. Sometimes a mother's heart needs to look at her child's face just to know everything is still real. So I put on a simple blouse, tied my hair back, and drove over to their house. I brought a small bag with some homemade peach cobbler, something he always loved. I don't know why I thought bringing that would help. Maybe I hoped the smell of it would remind him of home, of childhood, of us. When I pulled up to the driveway, I noticed both cars were there. Good, I thought. They're home. Maybe this is the day things shift. Maybe this is the moment we start patching things up. I walked up to the porch, took a deep breath, and knocked. I waited. I heard footsteps inside, slow and deliberate. Then the door opened, and she stood there, his wife. Makeup perfect, expression unreadable, body blocking the doorway just slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to make me feel unwelcome. I smiled anyway, holding up the dish. "Hey, sweetie. I just thought I'd drop by and bring a little something. Is he here?" She didn't smile back. Not even a pretend one. "He's busy," she said. Her tone wasn't rude, but it was cold. Polished. Like she'd practiced it. "Busy." I repeated softly. "Well, maybe I can just say hello real quick." "No," she said, sharper this time. "Now isn't a good time." I stood there, stunned for a moment. I had followed every boundary they'd set, even the ones they never said out loud. I had stayed quiet, stayed patient, stayed understanding. But something about her tone, it cut deeper than I expected. I cleared my throat, trying to stay calm. I haven't seen him in a while, baby. I miss him. That's all. Her jaw tightened. We're trying to build our own life now. Our own home. It's better if we have some space. Space. I whispered, the word tasting strange on my tongue. She folded her arms a little, then leaned her shoulder into the doorframe. Look, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but you're not really part of this household anymore. This is just for us. For a moment, everything around me went quiet. The air, the highway in the distance. Even my heartbeat felt like it paused. I stared at her, unable to believe what I had just heard. I'm not family? She shrugged lightly, as if the conversation meant nothing to her. You're his mother. But this, she gestured inside. This is our life now. We need to focus on us. Please don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. There are words people say because they don't understand the weight they carry. And then there are words people say because they know exactly what they're doing. Before I could find my breath again, I saw movement behind her. My son. He came up behind her slowly, like he was unsure whether to step forward or stay hidden. His eyes met mine for the briefest second, and I saw something there, guilt, conflict, maybe even shame, but he didn't say a word. Baby, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Is this how you feel too? He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away like the wall was suddenly fascinating. She's right, he finally said, voice soft but firm enough to break something inside me. We're trying to figure things out. We need boundaries. We need time. Just us. Boundaries. Time. Just us. I felt my fingers trembling around the dish I was holding. The peach cobbler suddenly felt heavy, ridiculous, out of place. I thought about all the times I'd woken up early to pack his lunches. All the birthdays I planned alone. All the nights I stayed awake worrying sick when he didn't come home on time. All the hospital visits, doctor's appointments, parent-teacher conferences, scraped knees, broken hearts. And now, I was being treated like a stranger at the door. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I never wanted to be in the way. I just wanted to see you. That's all. His wife shifted, impatient. This isn't a good time. I'm asking you to respect our space. Respect. Funny how people who take suddenly demand respect when you ask for the smallest piece of what once belonged to you. My son still stood behind her, eyes on the floor. Not one step forward. Not one word to defend the woman who raised him alone. I looked at him for a long second, waiting for something, anything. But he stayed silent. And silence can hurt worse than any insult. I felt something warm sliding down my cheek before I even realized I was crying. I wiped it quickly, not wanting them to see. Not wanting to fall apart on their doorstep. I nodded slowly. I hear you, I said. My voice sounded older somehow, worn. I won't bother you. I turned to leave. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the dish. I set it down on the porch rail gently, like a fragile thing prone to shattering. As I walked down the steps, the sun felt too bright, the air too thin. Each step felt like a mistake I couldn't undo. Behind me, I heard the door close. Not gently, not respectfully. It closed the way a chapter ends. When I reached my car, I had to hold onto the door just to steady myself. My breath came in short waves. I didn't know if I wanted to scream or sob, or just crumble right there on the gravel. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands gripping the wheel, staring at their house, the place I thought my family would grow, not shrink. I whispered to myself, not family? After everything I did. It didn't make sense. It still doesn't. But as I sat there, trying to gather the pieces of myself, one truth settled heavy in my chest. You can give someone your whole life, and still have them choose someone else's voice over yours. I drove home slowly, tears blurring the streetlights into soft halos. When I got inside, the house felt too quiet, too empty. I sat at the kitchen table, where his favorite meals were made, where we used to laugh, where I once believed love meant security. And all I could hear was her voice telling me I wasn't family anymore. Those words didn't just break me, they changed me. And the days that followed, the silence, the distance, the realization that I was truly alone, they shaped the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I had to learn the hardest lesson of motherhood. Sometimes the child you carried grows into someone you don't recognize. And sometimes the love you poured in doesn't return to the place it came from. The pain of that day didn't fade quickly, but it did lead me into the next part of the story, where silence becomes a teacher, and distance becomes something you can't ignore anymore. After that day on their doorstep, I woke up the next morning with a heaviness in my chest that felt almost physical. It wasn't anger, not even heartbreak in the usual sense. It was something deeper, a kind of quiet grief. The grief you feel when someone is still alive but no longer yours in the way they used to be. I told myself I would give them space. Not because they asked for it out of love, but because fighting for a place in someone's life shouldn't feel like begging. A mother should never have to stand at the edge of her child's world, knocking like a stranger. And if that was the version of me they wanted, distant, quiet, pushed aside, then maybe the only thing left for me to do was step back and stop bleeding for people who didn't want to see the wound. So I stopped calling every day. I stopped checking in. I stopped showing up hoping for a warm welcome. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. My heart was tired, and tired hearts need rest, not more breaking. The silence started small. A day without hearing from him. Then 3. Then a week. At first, I kept glancing at my phone, expecting it to light up with his name. I'd wake up thinking, maybe today he'll call. But the days kept passing. 1 week turned into 2. 2 turned into a month. The ache in my chest slowly dulled, like a bruise fading under the skin but never fully disappearing. When the phone finally did ring, I almost didn't pick up. Not out of anger, but because I didn't want to fall back into the same old pattern, me giving, him taking, and no space for my own needs. When I saw his name on the screen, my breath caught for a moment. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. "Hey, Ma," he said, sounding slightly rushed but polite, like someone making a call because they had to, not because they wanted to. "Hey, baby," I said gently. "Everything all right?" He hesitated. I was wondering if you could help me out. My car's acting up. Think you could give me a ride to work tomorrow?" There it was, the familiar pattern. Not, "How are you, Ma?" Not, "I miss you." A request. A favor. I said yes because love has a hard time saying no, even when it should. The next morning, I picked him up. He slid into the passenger seat smelling of cologne, dressed neatly, talking about his job. Not once did he mention the last time we saw each other. Not once did he ask how I'd been. I listened, nodding and smiling, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. He looked healthy, successful, like life was treating him well. But not once did he look at me the way he used to, with warmth, with connection, with familiarity. He talked to me the way people talk to a nice neighbor or a librarian. Kind but distant. Respectful but detached. As I drove, he texted on his phone. I stole a few glances at him, wondering if he remembered the little boy who used to lean his head on my shoulder every time we were in the car. I wondered if he remembered the nights I drove across town in the rain to pick him up when he was stranded. I wondered if he remembered anything at all from the years I carried him on my back while trying to carry myself at the same time. But some memories belong only to the people who lived them fully. And those memories were mine, not his. He said thanks when I dropped him off, then got out quickly. I drove home feeling empty, but also strangely aware. Aware that I was pouring from a cup no one cared to refill. The next few months were like that. He reached out only when he needed something. Sometimes it was a ride. Sometimes help filling out paperwork. Sometimes borrowing $20 until payday. He never called just to talk. Never stopped by just to see me. Never once brought his wife with him. It became a pattern. One I recognized, one I contributed to, one I slowly learned I had to break. There was a day near the end of summer when he called, asking if I could help him out with a bill. Something about the electric company, something urgent. He sounded stressed. I told him I'd see what I could do. After sending him the money, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the confirmation message on my phone. A realization washed over me, gentle but firm. I had become a resource, not a mother, a resource. Someone he reached for in inconvenience, not in affection. I set my phone down and whispered to myself, this can't be my life. This can't be what motherhood becomes at 62. I had spent years thinking that stepping back meant losing him completely. But stepping back was the only way I could see myself clearly again. For decades, I defined my worth through how much I could give. Now, I needed to learn a different kind of love, one that included me. So I made a promise to myself. A quiet one. A private one. Not to cut him off. Not to punish him. Not to be cold. Just not to abandon myself for him anymore. The next time he called, I let it ring twice before answering. My voice was calm, steady. Ma, you think you could help me move some stuff this weekend? I'm sorry, baby, I said softly. I already have plans. It wasn't a lie. My plan was to rest, to water my plants, to read a book, to drink my coffee slowly in the morning without rushing somewhere I wasn't appreciated. Those things may seem small, but they were mine, and I refused to push them aside again. He was quiet for a moment, surprised. Oh, okay. There was confusion in his voice, maybe even disappointment. He wasn't used to me choosing myself. For years, I had said yes because I thought that's what a good mother did. But a good mother doesn't teach her child that love means endless sacrifice. A good mother shows her child what boundaries look like. And so I held my boundary, soft but strong. Over time, something unexpected happened. The silence that used to hurt started to feel like space, space I needed, space I deserved. I found myself waking up in the mornings feeling lighter. My chest didn't feel tight anymore. My phone stopped being something I checked every few minutes. I started living again in small ways. I visited friends I hadn't seen in years. I took walks around the neighborhood in the cool evenings. I spent afternoons in the garden, listening to birds. I cooked meals for myself, not waiting to feed someone else. I even laughed more, real laughter, not the kind forced out of politeness. I didn't hate my son. I still loved him just as deeply. But the love shifted. It grew quieter, steadier, something that belonged to me instead of controlling me. And though he didn't say it aloud, he noticed the change. His calls became slightly more frequent, not much, but enough to show he felt the shift. Sometimes he'd ask about my day. Sometimes he'd share little details about his life without immediately turning it into a request. Small things, but meaningful ones. He still kept his distance. He still followed the rhythms of his wife's influence. But now, I wasn't chasing him. I wasn't holding the relationship together with both hands while he offered only fingertips. Instead, I was learning the strength of letting go. Not the kind of letting go that ends a relationship, but the kind that stops you from drowning in one. Weeks passed. Months passed. And even though the hurt never fully left, it settled into something I could carry without breaking. It was around then that the next shift in our story appeared, unexpected, heavy, and revealing. A moment when life forced him to find me again, not for money, not for rides, not for favors, but because he needed something he couldn't get from anyone else. And that moment was where the next part of the story began. When I finally began stepping back from my son, not out of anger, but out of survival. I didn't know who I was without all that giving. For so long, my heartbeat had lined up with his needs. My days, my decisions, my energy, it all belonged to him. And when he stopped reaching for me, I realized I didn't know what reaching for my own life even looked like. The silence at first felt sharp, like the air right before a storm. But slowly something softened. The house, which once felt painfully quiet, began feeling peaceful instead. Mornings weren't spent waiting for a phone call that never came. Evenings weren't heavy with disappointment. I started waking up not to absence, but to possibility. One morning, I walked outside barefoot, coffee in hand, and stood on the porch while the sun rose over the neighbor's maple tree. The air was cool, the light soft and gentle. I realized it was the first time in years I had felt the morning instead of rushing through it. I whispered to myself, maybe this part of my life is just for me. And somehow, those words felt like the first brick in a foundation I had never built for myself. I began taking small steps, nothing dramatic. A community center near my home started offering morning gatherings for seniors, yoga, cooking classes, gardening meetups. The old me would have made excuses. I'm too tired, I don't know anyone, maybe next week. But something in me said, why not? So I went, just once at first. Then again. Then again. I met people, real people, women who'd lived lives just as complicated as mine, men who'd lost spouses and were learning how to talk without breaking apart, folks who weren't there to take anything from me, just to live, to connect, to share. I joined a small volunteer group that served meals every Thursday at a nearby shelter. I'd show up early, tie on an apron, and help cook big pots of warm food. The smell of onions sizzling, the chatter of volunteers, the sound of laughter, it all reminded me that I still had a place in this world. I made friends with a woman named Lorraine, 68, loud in the best way, big earrings, bigger opinions. She'd tap my arm during meetings and whisper, don't let these folks fool you. We're the youngest souls in this whole room. She made me laugh until tears came. Something I hadn't done in so long. I began tending a small garden behind the house. Tomatoes, collards, herbs, flowers that reminded me of summers when I was a girl. I'd kneel in the dirt, hands deep in the soil, and feel something healing inside me, like the earth was taking in everything I'd held for too long. I realized slowly, I wasn't lonely. I was living. And somewhere in that quiet, gentle rebuilding of myself, my son noticed. The first call came one afternoon while I was sitting on the porch shelling peas. My phone buzzed, and when I saw his name, I didn't feel panic or hope. I felt calm. Hey, Ma, he said, his voice softer than usual. Hey, baby, I answered, matching his tone. I was just checking on you. It was such a simple sentence, but it landed strangely. Checking on me? That wasn't something he did. I could hear hesitation in his voice, like he wasn't sure how to ask the questions sitting on his tongue. A few days later, he called again. No request this time. Just conversation. Small talk, sure, but it was something. And it was the first time I sensed something shifting in him, like the foundation he'd built with his wife was shaking just enough to make him look backward. Then one evening, he showed up at my door without calling first. I opened it to find him standing there, hands in his pockets, eyes uneasy. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, looking around like he hadn't been in my house in years. Maybe it had felt that long to him. Maybe longer. He sat at the kitchen table, the same place he'd sat all through childhood, through teenage years, through birthdays and heartbreaks. I poured him a glass of tea and took the seat across from him. For a while, he didn't speak. He just stared at the table, tapping his fingers lightly. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different, softer, tired, searching. Ma, I think I messed up, he said quietly. I didn't say a word. I just let him talk. He told me things he hadn't said before, about the pressure he felt to choose sides, about how his wife didn't like how close we used to be, about how he didn't know how to balance keeping peace in his home with keeping me in his life. He admitted he had let things go too far, that he hadn't stood up for me, that he had made choices he wasn't proud of. A part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to say, I told you so. But mostly, I just felt a bittersweet kind of understanding, the kind that comes when someone finally says the truth you've known all along. Baby, I said gently. I'm not asking to be first in your life. I'm asking to have a place in it. He lowered his head. I know, Ma. I know. We talked for a long time after that. Not everything got fixed in one night. Hurt doesn't disappear just because someone apologizes. But it was a start. A real start. And here's the part that some people might call revenge, though it never felt like that to me. My son came back, but I didn't shrink myself to fit into his life again. I didn't drop everything the moment he called. I didn't make myself small just to keep peace. This time, he came into my world, not the other way around. He learned to ask, "Are you free?" instead of assuming. He learned to visit because he wanted to, not because he needed something. He learned that my love didn't mean unlimited access. He learned boundaries. And in that gentle shift, something powerful happened. I got my life back, without losing him completely. My quiet revenge wasn't anger. It wasn't shutting doors or ending relationships. It was proving to him, to her, to myself, that I didn't need anyone's permission to be whole, to be happy, to be me. I built the life that didn't depend on his approval. I found joy in places that didn't require his participation. I filled my days with people who valued me, not people who tolerated me. And when he finally realized he couldn't control me with guilt, when he realized I wasn't waiting by the phone anymore, that's when he came back sincerely. That's when he came back humbled, human, wanting connection instead of control. We're still finding our way. Some days are easier than others. But now, I let him in on my terms. And if I'm honest, I think he respects me more this way. Sometimes you teach people how to love you by refusing to let them hurt you the same way twice. If you've lived anything like this, if you've been pushed out, pulled back, broken a little, rebuilt a lot, maybe you understand what I mean when I say, peace can be its own revenge. A full life can be its own justice. And loving yourself can be the beginning of everything you thought you lost. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.